Welcome to this month's Creation Justice webinar, a gathering place for building a faith-rooted and faith-sustained movement addressing some of the most pressing issues facing our world today. I'm Brooks Arent, the Environmental Justice Minister for the United Church of Christ. I am joined by my esteemed co-host, the Reverend Michael Malcolm, the Executive Director for the People's Justice Council and Alabama Interfaith Power and Light. Michael, I had a dream last night. I want to tell you about this as we get started. It was almost a nightmare at first. A bus full of kids was dangling over the edge of a cliff. But then something happened that kept my dream from being a nightmare. Tied to the bumper at the end of that bus was a rope. And that rope ran all the way to you, my friend. There you were, calling out to me and calling out to others, calling on us to come help you save this busload of kids. Now, any one of us could have said, Michael, what's the use? My little bit of strength isn't going to save that busload of kids. But we didn't do that. We quickly grabbed that rope and pulled with all our might until those kids were brought to safety. Now, Brooks, why are you telling us about this dream? Because I think it gets to our unique ethical obligation when it comes to voting. Our own individual votes, if we are completely honest, often don't do a lot. But if we call out to others, if we get ourselves organized to pull on that rope, then we can make all the difference in the world. What do you think, Michael? Can we save that busload of kids starting with this webinar today, with this lineup that we've got today? What are your thoughts, Michael?
You know, Brooks, to be honest with you, I don't feel like my faith would have even led me here if I weren't here to save the kids. I'd even venture to say that none of our guests who we have today would be here if they weren't here to save our futures. In all actuality, we're all on this call because we understand what matters. We operate in our capacities of care because we know that our participation is our stewardship. Voting for us is more than a privilege to use our individual voices to make a difference. It is our way of showing our communities and the cosmos that we are good stewards. It is our way of letting our neighbors know that we care and that they matter. When we cast our moral vote, we're standing as the collective conscience of this society. Casting our moral vote saves the children, and it ensures that they can breathe when they exit the bus. I'm eager to hear from our guests today to provide us with nuggets that we can utilize and advocate for as we start this election season. I look forward to hearing from them. Thank you.
Michael, I think we've got a lot of nuggets coming our way today. Let me now introduce our panelists in the order in which they'll be speaking. Up first, we have Brionté McCorkle, who serves as the Executive Director for Georgia Conservation Voters. Brionté has spent her career training activists, advancing equity and inclusion in the environmental movement, and organizing grassroots voters. She formerly served as the Director of Engagement for Echo Districts, and before that as the Georgia Sierra Club Assistant Director. Up next, we will hear from Saul Levin, who is the Legislative and Political Director for the Green New Deal Network. Saul was formerly a legislative assistant for Congresswoman Cori Bush, and it was during that time that Saul was one of 6 congressional staffers who were arrested for protesting in Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's office as part of an ultimately successful effort to pass climate legislation, what we now know as the Inflation Reduction Act. As our final speaker today, we have Wanda Mosley. Wanda was named National Field Director at Black Voters Matter after the historically successful efforts in Georgia during the 2020 presidential election and the 2021 U.S. Senate runoff races. BVM is a power building organization that works with Black-led organizations, primarily in rural communities, to build Black political power. We are grateful for this lineup today. Brionté, if you could get us started, we would love to hear from you.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Brionté McCorkle. As you heard, I'm the executive director at Georgia Conservation Voters. Basically, what we do is we work to organize and mobilize voters around climate and environmental justice issues. That is, something that I've been really passionate about for a decade, and I think that we are at a very pivotal point in human history around these two issues. I think that people are really starting to understand the connection between people and planet, and that we can't have healthy people without a healthy planet, and we can't have a healthy planet without healthy people. They go hand in hand. And, here in Georgia, let me take a step back. Every election cycle, there's always some reporter that calls me and is like, what's the one environmental issue that's got all Georgians fired up? And I'm like, if you're asking that question, then you don't understand climate and environmental justice. It's never, one big thing. It shows up a million different ways in people's lives, right? Some people, for example, living in coastal communities are very much concerned about sea level rise, about development along the coast, about keeping the oceans clean. These are things that come to mind. If you're living in a city, you're probably concerned about also flooding, but differently. It's not sea level rise, it's infrastructure problems. We have major rainstorms that flood communities in matters of seconds, communities that never flooded before. Especially here in Atlanta, we're dealing with that. That comes to mind. Extreme heat comes to mind for people, especially people who work outdoors. If you're a farmer, you're concerned about climate change, you're concerned about drought, right? You're concerned about access to clean water. So it just depends on where you are and what's going on in your community. And sometimes people are dealing with climate and environmental justice issues that they don't immediately think about as a climate or an EJ issue. One of the biggest things we spend time working on is utilities. We work to try to stop power bills from going up. And people are always like, well, I thought you were an environmental organization. Why are you working on power bills? Why are you working on utilities? And it's because, in Georgia, especially, we have a utility that continues to raise bills on people in the middle of this affordability crisis that we're dealing with. Bills are skyrocketing. They've been increased, multiple times a year, every year for the past 5 years here in Georgia. And people are starting to feel the squeeze between power bills and food costs and insurance costs and housing costs and all of these things consistently going up. But there's a climate story behind those power bill increases. Your bills are going up because Georgia Power continues to invest in dirty energy. They continue to expand natural gas infrastructure and try to keep dirty coal plants that are expensive and polluting alive. And they're also making communities sick. They're using these fossil fuel investments and then justifying your bills increases and then giving you no option for cheaper and more affordable energy. And guess who's at the top of that decision-making chain? There's an elected official there, right? There's somebody that you can hold accountable, and that's your public service commissioner. And so people know they have high power bills, and we help to do the work to connect what they're experiencing with the bigger climate and EJ story there. And we also connect that with voting and power and what people can actually do within the system to make change. So I didn't know how much time I had to introduce myself, but that's what we do. We help connect the dots between climate, EJ issues, voting. Hopefully I gave you a little preview and I can expand on some of these things more later.
Thank you so much, Brionté. We'll look forward to hearing more later. We'll turn now to Saul.
Thank you all so much for having me. It's great to be here with you. Can you hear me okay? Wonderful. And it's great to be on with my friend Brionté. Hello. Nice to see you. And Rev, thanks for the invitation. Revs, it's great to be on with you all. I'm Saul. I use he, him pronouns. As Brooks mentioned, I'm the legislative and political director at the Green New Deal Network, which is the hub of the movement for a Green New Deal. And so we sort of anchor and connect people across the Green New Deal movement towards building the good and really investing in communities most impacted by the climate crisis, and really trying to, as we're fighting against dangerous pipelines and as we're, trying to get people to stop burning fossil fuels, also putting forward really positive proposals around what could an equitable, utility system look like? What could an equitable transportation system that actually is built to serve everyone and reduce emissions look like? Those kinds of questions, and try and really bring those to the fore. And it's a lot of fun. So in our coalition, we have a lot of different folks in, states and cities around the country, and then other movements who are fighting for a Green New Deal, such as the Movement for Black Lives and the Indigenous Environmental Network and folks like that. And we sort of bring together racial justice, labor, and climate to try and see if pushing all together we can win. I think what I wanted to talk about is sort of a duality that we've been holding right now, which is we represent movements with very diverse communities, and we also represent a younger generation that knows that our survival and my goddaughter's survival and so on are really contingent on action being taken on an immediate and emergency basis to divert the impacts from the climate crisis, so that those who have the least aren't suffering and dying anymore, because people already are right now. And we are in an interesting position where there's a lot of people around the country who are running for office who want to do the right thing, but there's moneyed interests who are pushing them really hard to do things that are, in service of profit as opposed to in service of people's basic needs. And so we try and outsmart and out strategize and out hustle them and get around to different candidates around the country first, and get to people before they've been caught up in that machine and say, hey, why don't we start with what people need, and especially those who have the least in your community. And what they need is for the government to invest to make sure that everybody can stay safe, regardless of disability, religion, background, etc. And, that message really resonates. And so I think we've been finding that, like, when we can get there first, it can be really powerful. So we've been talking to a lot of state and local candidates. One of the most amazing things we find is that we talk to state representatives and city councilors all over the country who are like, we don't know how to do a Green New Deal thing or a climate justice thing, but if you can tell us or connect us with local folks who know how, like, we'll introduce a bill. It happens all the time, like probably once a week. And so it's just like keeping up with the demand and finding, ally and volunteer support to make things really happen. But there's a lot of interest and a lot of people who really want to do the right thing. So we're really excited about working on local races, which have huge impacts this year. We're also working really hard to defend our close allies on the Green New Deal who are going to be attacked by AIPAC, which is a far-right group that works on Israel but attacks folks, who are interested in peace, who are interested in diverse Jewish perspectives on how to achieve peace in Israel, and so on, and have pledged to spend $100 million attacking a bunch of candidates who are some of the biggest champions of the Green New Deal. And so we're spending a lot of energy trying to defend. We don't have as much money, but doing what we can to try and defend those candidates, as well as a lot of other progressive candidates who are, legislating with Black and Brown and Indigenous lives in mind, legislating with the idea that, whatever normal is not going to work for the climate crisis in mind, and really trying to support those folks who are really doing community first work to stick around, as well as pushing forward some newer candidates. I'll actually drop it in the chat. Last cycle, we developed a really cool project called the Green New Deal Champions Pledge, and highly recommend folks to use this as a tool. It basically asks a candidate for federal office, will you support the 10 main Green New Deal bills if elected? And will you pledge to not take money from the fossil fuel industry as you're running? And so we worked together with anti-fossil fuel and pro-Green New Deal, like brought everyone together around something that's a really good tool, because if they say outright no, you know you got a problem. You don't know what it is yet, but that's a problem. And if they have questions, that's okay. And I can drop my email, we can always help. But last cycle, we had over 75 candidates sign on, and 6 of them won and immediately have been signing on to the best bills. And it's, another logo they can put on their website, et cetera. So that's a good tool. And then last, I'll speak about our federal work on the Green New Deal, sort of in this moment of campaigning, it's very discouraging. It's really hard. I think a lot of us are in this position. So we're kind of operating in that in-between space right now that's been very challenging. But also, I think really there's a clear moral call to demand what we need. So that's sort of how we're thinking about it. Anyways, I'm really grateful to be here. I sadly can't stay for the Q&A, but it's so great to be on with Brionté and Wanda. And I will put my email in the chat if folks have questions, or we can be helpful in any way. We'd love to work with any of you. And thank you to Rev Burnt and Rev Malcolm for having us on today.
Thank you, Saul. We appreciate those insights and that perspective that you just shared. It's much valued. We'll turn now to Wanda.
Good afternoon, everybody. Saul, definitely expect to get an email from me. Would definitely love to talk with you more about how we can collaborate on this work. Thank you, Brooks, for the invitation. I'm excited to be here. If for no other reason, I get to be in a virtual space with my friend and my sister and my colleague, Brionté, who is absolutely genius when it comes to all this climate stuff. And I start off and I offer that to say I am not the climate expert, but what I think I represent are people who want to know more, who desire to know more, and who are smart enough to find people who know all this stuff and just be connected at the hip with them as much as possible. So that's, the space that I hold. So I did want to just do a really quick PowerPoint to kind of support some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. And as I do that, I'll just again say that I'm Wanda Mosley with Black Voters Matter. I'm serving as the National Field Director. And we are a power building organization doing work across 10 core states where we have full-time staff. And then another 10 or so what we call light states, meaning that there are folks on the ground doing good work. We are a power building organization. Power comes in many different forms. Voting is definitely one of our superpowers, but we know that we also hold a space and a belief that voting alone is not going to serve the masses and is not going to get us all the things that we want and we desire. And so today I'm specifically going to talk about, our journey into this environmental justice work. So I'll start off with what I kind of think is some of the issues as to why there aren't more people involved in this work. And I think it's because, as I mentioned before, I'm not an expert, obviously, but I think it also has something to do with how we talk about climate and climate change. A lot of these phrases are concepts that everyday folks may not necessarily navigate comfortably. And it might be a situation where people are just kind of shying away from being more involved in the work because of how it is that we talk about climate and climate justice. And so these are all phrases and terms that y'all have all heard: fossil fuels, greenhouse emissions, solar ice caps. When you come into communities where people are living at or above, the poverty levels. If we think about the fact that we live in a community in a time where we don't have a livable wage, these are not the things that are most important in people's minds, in their homes, in their communities. A lot of people are struggling just to try to keep up with these high utility bills that are made higher, as Brionté mentioned, because of how, we do this work or we don't do this work with regards to climate. And so, just some of the graphics that kind of support or sort of the picture, the images that come to mind when we hear people talk about climate change. And not to say that, global warming and the The range of heat is not important. It's extremely important. Last year was the hottest summer on record for the planet, and experts have already said this year is going to be hotter. We know. I love animals. I'm a conservationist at heart. World Wildlife Fund has me on speed dial. So yes, the polar bears and sea turtles and all living creatures are at risk because of the things that we are or are not doing. But again, when we talk about mobilizing voters, this is not going to be the way that we get more people involved in this fight. So again, I want to just talk a little bit about how it is that we talk about climate change at Black Voters Matter. And so for us, it's really about climate justice. We need to talk about and center our utility bills. We need to talk about clean air. Why is it that certain zip codes in certain parts of town, children have higher rates of asthma? We talk about, do we have access to clean drinking water? I'm thinking about, our friends and family and colleagues in Jackson, Mississippi. Thinking about the folks that live in Rock Hill, South Carolina, who to this day still take empty water jugs down to a river near their home because the water that comes into their homes from their municipal water supply isn't safe for them to drink because of a chemical additive that the state approved putting in the water because they thought it was going to clean the water. We should also talk about the effect that climate has on housing and whether or not homes are weatherized and that cause that has with these high utility bills. And then finally, as was mentioned earlier, access to healthy food, locally grown food, and why it is that that's so important. And so when we started talking about how we would do work around climate justice, we came up with this idea to use a phrase that's very popular in the Black community: the block is hot. And so we use this opportunity to engage and educate the folks that we are trying to reach. And as you can see, this is not something that we, or as I'll talk about in this, is not something that we do alone. We are in coalition with GCV, Georgia Conservation Voters, and other organizations across the state who are either experts at this or experts in voting, experts in electoral work, coming all together to make certain that we are doing the best that we can to mobilize voters around this very important issue. So again, utility bills, housing, pollution, how all these things come together and affect us in our communities. And so one of the things that we're known for at Black Voters Matters, we have what we call the Blackest Bus in America. So we got the bus on the road and thought we'd come into community with our colleagues to talk about why it is that climate and climate justice is so important and use that as a tool to organize and get people to the polls. Again, these are some of the push cards that we use to distribute to get folks to come out to these events. We have a strong commitment with the faith community. We work with folks at barbershops, beauty salons, Black-owned restaurants, wherever it is that our folks are. This is where we want to be so that we are able to reach them. And we are also bringing into community resources. Our partner organizations will bring, the LED light bulbs, resources on assistance with utility bills, tablets, whatever it is that we can bring something into the community, because we don't want to be extractive. We don't want them to know that, we don't want them to believe that we're there just to get their votes. We are also there to support them. And so we're also making sure that we're bringing resources to folks when we're coming into community. And then our messaging is really important on, again, how we talk about climate change, climate justice, environmental justice, and all of those things. Using images and authentic messaging that resonates with the communities that we are working with. I don't know if y'all remember, if any of you were kids and you drank out of pretty much anything at the park or at someone's house, a water hose, anything. Our message to our communities today is that's not safe. It's not the same as it was then. I'm not sure how safe it was then either, but we all live to tell about it. But today we know we cannot rely on our cities and our counties to provide us with clean drinking water. But we want to do the work that maybe one day we can get back to that. Again, another emphasis on the clean drinking water and why it should be accessible for all of us. So what is it that we're trying to do? Well, we're trying to get some policy outcomes. We know we want to have lower utility rates. We want our cities and our municipalities to offer discount rates for seniors. I was shocked to learn that that is not a given. Always growing up in a big city and knowing that, these are some of the very simple policy measures that our local government can offer to us, along with payment plans. You would be surprised at how many communities don't offer payment plans to help with the large bills that we incur during the summer months when it's hot and the winter months when it's cold. And then again, also having freedom from pass-through costs that are heaped upon us that, Brionté can tell you all kinds of stories about all the stuff that we have to pay to these large utility companies that are sitting on billions of dollars in their coffers. And so how do we do this? Well, we're going to organize, we're going to mobilize, we're going to use these real kitchen table issues to invite and engage people in this climate justice fight with us. We're going to, as Saul mentioned earlier, really focus on local elections. So utility boards, understanding who makes up a utility board. If you're living in a part of the state where you're not getting your utilities from Georgia Power, you should look to, these local boards and understand that oftentimes a lot of these folks are appointed by an elected official. Think about the city of Albany, where they have city commissioners who appoint their utility board members. Knowing when these folks are on the ballot and connecting with them and asking them what plan they have to address the issues in your community. And then obviously electing candidates whose values will align with ours, and then being in constant communication and contact with them for accountability. We can't just let people get elected and not hold them accountable, not be in communication and telling them what the issues are in our communities and reminding them very nicely that they are elected by us, so they work for us. And then also engaging and letting them know that we are willing to work with them. And so I also offer that last piece, knowing, as I mentioned, sort of at the top of this discussion, that we live in a time and place where folks do not have a livable wage in the form of a minimum wage. And so when we're having these conversations with our communities and our folks, we have to remember that, sometimes asking someone to attend a utility meeting, a city council meeting, which is intentionally set at times that aren't convenient for working class folks, for parents. So we have to make sure that, when we're engaging with folks and we're inviting them into this work, that at the same time, we're not shaming them and then we're not causing them any extra burdens. And so that, I believe, is all of my time. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to Brooks. Thank you.
Thank you so much to each of our presenters for those wonderful presentations. Michael, would you like to get us started with a question?
Yeah. So each of you all have made mention that you work with congregations when it comes down to your civic duties and getting them mobilized. Being that you are speaking with a large audience of pastors and denominational leaders, how best, what would probably be some of the best methods for getting your congregation involved in the civic duties?
Brionté, you want to start?
Yeah,
don't
but I
all
have to be
jump
honest
at once.
that most of our engagement with congregation comes through our partners. We did our last organizing director had lots of personal relationships with faith-based organizations. And she would contact her people in her network and pull people together for meetings about utilities and to pull them together for meetings, utilities would come up, and then we would have that conversation about the Public Service Commission and different actions that they could take and engage in. And I think I want to be really clear that sequencing is really important. We don't like to come into communities and hey, this is a problem for you. You need to be concerned about it. You sort of, create space for people to come and express what's happening in their lives. And, then you take what's coming up and distill it and then try to make connections and provide resources that, will help people actually resolve some of those problems that come up. So mostly just relationship building, I would say is the best way that we have found to engage congregations. I also want to, point out this article that that's actually maybe not the most positive thing, but it came across my desk this morning, but it's a concept I've been working with for some time, which is, we spend a lot of time working with the Public Service Commission because of those utility bills I talked about, and they regulate Georgia Power. which is the state's largest utility, Georgia Power spends a lot of money in faith-based organizations, with faith-based organizations. They write checks to people. They help them expand their campuses. They sponsor events. And all of this is an attempt by the power company to neutralize the engagement of those congregations in, pushing back against utility increases or whatever plans that the power company has cooked up. So I just want to put congregations on alert. I know that folks always need resources to make things happen, and that's always a hard part. But I would really encourage you that if you are going to take money from the utility, that you're not making a agreement that you're going to be quiet when it comes to speaking up against things that folks who are attending your church are experiencing. Many folks are going to be experiencing those high power bills. And I think it's important that congregations don't give up their power in organizing and facilitating folks to be engaged and advocating for lower rates. So that's my thoughts there.
Yeah, no, I would agree wholeheartedly with you on that, Brionté. We see that quite a bit. Large corporations offering, funds for beautification, to create gardens and plant, pretty flowers and things like that. But none of that will mask, some of the egregious acts against the community. And so we have to be able to hold them accountable, and we have to be able to be true to ourselves. Our engagement with the faith community, look, the faith community has been at the forefront of so many movements in this country, most notably the civil rights movement and many movements that we are involved in today. And so having the church involved, the faith community involved in this environmental justice fight, makes sense. We've got a lot of churches, a lot of pastors, a lot of ministerial alliances and women's councils and whatnot that we work with in our everyday fight for social justice. And so, being able to include the faith community is really important. It's interesting. One of the things that I mentioned earlier about, food justice and having access to clean and healthy food. There are studies that tell us, reports that tell us rather, that the largest block of land ownership in the Black community comes from the faith community. And so if we think about how, different efforts that are happening in different parts of the state, different parts of the country rather, utilizing community gardens, having churches set up community gardens and hosting events where folks can come and have access to healthy food. Again, having a building and being cornerstones and trusted messengers in the community, as Brionté mentioned earlier, having a space to utilize for town hall meetings, to invite elected officials out to gather as a community and talk about the issues and how we can come together and organize around those. I think a lot of there in Georgia in particular, and I know I kind of peeked in the chat for a second, there are folks from all over the country, but in Georgia in particular, we have just sort of a culture of civic engagement, a culture of wanting to get more people involved and getting more access to voting and voter registration. And so organically, there are so many members of the faith community who will reach out to us, who are already working with us, who are doing good work, and we can, identify and see them doing work and reach out and make connections with them, in this nonpartisan work in particular. So the faith community has such an important role to play, and I urge everyone to please reach out to whoever it is that's in your community that you can work with to be involved in this climate justice, environmental justice fight.
Thank you for those responses. As I think about this coming year, I'm thinking from the vantage point of a volunteer. I know I'm going to be getting appeals for money. I know I'm also going to be getting appeals for my time, help with this canvassing effort or that canvassing effort or this get out the vote effort. From your perspective, can you tell us about, like, from a volunteer's perspective, what's a good way to spend time and energy and so forth? What activities are known to be, from experience or from witnessing it, that are effective, right? If you want to make a difference in this upcoming election season, what should I be doing with my time and resources if I want to have the biggest impact? And feel free to toot the horn of your own organization and what you're doing, but just help us think that through. when we're thinking about what we want to get behind?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying that we know the most effective way to increase voter turnout or voter participation are in-person conversations. So knocking on doors, coming to community events, and just talking to folks. You know, our philosophy in terms of engagement is to listen first, to hear what is on someone's mind, you know, what issues they're most concerned with, and then be able to connect the dots to that issue to an elected official or seat. Our other philosophy is to always focus on local elections. You know, 24 was already a mess before 24 even started, right? And so if we continue to let the media drive the conversation and the narrative, we're in trouble. But if we can remind folks that there are so many issues, so many seats at the local level that are on the ballot, that's the best chance we have to motivate and mobilize people to the polls. So if there is a water board seat on the ballot, explaining to people what that is and how it affects them every day. If there is a local county commissioner, or if there's someone from Park and Recs, those in kitchen table, those very local issues, to really get people focused on, you know, what it is that they are going to, you know, what's going to motivate them to come out. So we definitely need volunteers. We definitely are going to be knocking on a lot of doors, making a lot of phone calls, sending a lot of text messages. So people, you know, in different places, different time allotments, different abilities. There are so many different ways to engage, and I will happily drop in the chat information on how folks can connect with us in terms of, you know, wanting to volunteer. But again, just the direct voter contact, that's going to be the most effective way to help folks come out. And, you know, I'll just pitch trying to keep all the conversations about local issues and stay away from presidential as much as possible.
I'm going to second that point. In election cycles, they tend to overfocus in the media on the president. And, you know, while I understand who is, you know, our national executive is incredibly important, it really does a disservice to democracy when you think that the only influential thing that you can do is vote for president. There are so many other positions down ballot that matter. And I encourage you to spend your time engaging with media that is talking about those down ballot positions. And if you're not finding that information through the media, that's not a surprise. The smaller the office, sometimes the harder it is to get coverage, especially in those bigger publications. So, you know, ask your neighbors who they know. Go out to community events. There's likely going to be elected officials that you can see, hear, feel, and touch in person that are running for cities, counties, state positions, legislative seats. You have senators, representatives. Those folks are going to be, you're going to see those people. You can talk to those people. There's not a squad of 40 Secret Service people around them preventing you from engaging with them and having a conversation and getting to know them. In person. That's going to be so much more powerful. And especially for climate and environmental justice issues, a lot of the change we need to see happens locally. Wanda was talking about access to clean water. Well, you know, the federal government provided some funding for local governments to make their systems cleaner. But guess what? It's got to be the county, the city people that take up that money. They're the ones accountable. And if all we're doing is yelling at the president, we're missing that opportunity to really ask our local leaders what they're doing for us, because often they have way more influence over our day-to-day lives. So I would say lean into those materials that are telling you about the things that you haven't engaged with or you don't know a lot about. That's going to be much more important. Ignore the presidential stuff. You know, I think that what makes me sad and what I think is the challenge is that there are a lot of people who aren't excited about the presidential candidates. I'm not excited about the presidential candidates right now. All right, I'm just going to speak transparently. And if people say, well, that is my reason for not voting, again, you know, you're looking at this little tip of the iceberg and missing that whole bigger chunk below. There are going to be several other things on your ballot. So I just really encourage you to focus on that. And in terms of what you can do, definitely engage with organizations like Wanda. You can engage with my organization. We'll also be doing get out the vote work, calls, texts, knocking on doors, all of those things to make sure that people, know what else is on their ballot and they get out to the polls. And whatever you choose to do, know that it's enough. You don't have to donate to every campaign. You don't have to show up to every single event. A donation here or there, an event here or there is more than enough, right? You are not omnipotent. You can't fix all the problems, right? But you are one warrior in this battle. And, please join us in the field how you can.
I'd also like to add to that, because we're giving out those volunteer opportunities. One of the organizations or platforms that we all work with, GCV, BVM, PJC, Green New Deal as well, is Arm and Arm. And with Arm and Arm, we're actually, that is our platform, our mechanism for engaging in real civic ways of engaging our public utilities. And that actually goes across 3 states right now, is because we're directly targeting Southern Company. So that's Georgia Power, Alabama Power, and Mississippi Power. And so if you're in those states, or even if you'd like to support us, I know I'm talking to some pastors and you all have congregations and you want to look at ways of being supportive. We really out here doing the work, and we in the streets for real, making this happen. And we could definitely use your support with Arm and Arm. So I wanted to make sure I added that in.
And I want to second that, because you had us out in these Atlanta streets and these Georgia streets for those stakeholders meetings, and our had fun. They enjoyed it. So we appreciate that, and looking to lock arms with y'all again very, very soon.
Absolutely.
One of the things I really appreciate when I'm around kind of get out the vote folks is to get some good coaching. I'm wondering if we might have some coaching. How do you engage and respond to people who maybe will say, the elected officials really aren't doing anything for me, or they're just not seeing the worth of voting when they look at what's happening and how their own lives are being impacted. How do you kind of coach us on engagement there? Any thoughts?
The very first thing that we have to do when we're having conversations with folks is affirm whatever reason they give us for not wanting to vote, not wanting to participate, or whatever they say is most important. So, look, we're talking specifically about climate, change, climate justice. But if I go and knock on your door and you tell me the most important thing to you in that moment is fixing potholes, I need to affirm that. I absolutely have to agree with you on that. I can't come and knock on your door and tell you what's important to you. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of well-meaning folks do. But we have to affirm. So whatever it is, if you tell me, we got a band of wild rabbits that run through the parks and I don't want to go to the park, I'll be like, wow, that's something. I didn't know anything about that. Tell me more. And then once I've listened and I've affirmed whatever it is that you say is important, I believe my job of trying to mobilize and motivate you to come out and vote is going to be that much easier, because I didn't come and talk at you. I listened, I heard, I acknowledged that I heard, and I affirmed you. And then I think from that point, I have an opportunity to start to engage in, whatever it is that I'm wanting to talk about, whether it's registering to vote, whether it's a special election, or if in that moment I'm volunteering for a candidate, and to be able to talk about what it is that they're going to bring to you as a constituent and what they're going to do to help build up the community. So that's always my first rule of thumb: just listen and affirm.
And I would say, I keep going back to this iceberg thing. I'm gonna put a graphic together so I can show it next time. The tip of the iceberg, voting, right? At the very tip top, just voting for president, right? Voting it's not an end all be all. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we frame conversations around voting as the only action that is needed to make democracy work. Elected officials, while they're very responsive to who they think will vote. So don't minimize the importance of voting. Starting a conversation with an elected official that says, I live in your district and I'm a voter, will have them sit straight up. That's powerful. But that conversation is more powerful than that vote. You see what I'm saying? You have to continually engage your elected officials, ask them what they've done for you lately, right? That is incredibly important. When people vote, it's like dating, you don't put all your tea on your dating profile. Okay. You put the best stuff out there to try to attract people. And that's what candidates are doing when they're running for office. That's what you see during campaign season, is that best foot forward. And then just like with a date, you go on a date and you're like, okay, they were telling the truth here. But that right there, they left that part out, right? So that's what happens when you start to engage your elected officials after the election. You start to see how they truly are acting in accordance with the values that they espoused on the campaign trail, or how they're not. And so I want people to know that continually engaging your elected official, asking them what they've done, asking them what they can do about XYZ issue, no matter how big or small it is in your community, and seeing how they respond to that is your best measure on whether or not you should continue to vote for this person, or you should decide to organize your neighbors to vote this person out of office, right? Civic engagement is a practice. It's not a one and done action that happens only on election cycles. So, let's all be more engaged, and I think we'll see that democracy will work better. So that's all I have to say there.
And I would just piggyback on the brilliance that Brionté just dropped. When engaging with your elected officials, don't be shy about saying the name of your congregation. Let them know that I may be one person standing in front of you, but if I am a Temple AME Zion, and in the back of their mind, they're going, ooh, that's a big church. I drive by there when I go to Dunkin' Donuts. Let them know. Let them know who you're representing. Let them know your network, the name of your subdivision. I live in a subdivision called Creekside. Creekside has almost 600 homes. Immediately, I have your attention, because like Brionté said, they're counting votes in the back of their minds. It's kind of what they do, and that's okay. But don't be afraid to, as the young people like to say, flex a little. Just have a little flex when you go talk to them.
Well, I will say, Sister Wanda, as preachers, we definitely know how to flex. And I know every preacher is laughing right now because we flex every Sunday.
I try to, like Brionté, try to remain in a nonpartisan space, but there's so much at stake. It's difficult. It's tough. And like we've already stated, telling people what to do is not going to work. We have to be able to listen and hear what folks are talking about, and hopefully connect the dots to inspire and motivate them to come out and vote. Specifically, Reverend Michael, Reverend Malcolm, if we talk about folks who are saying that they're not going to vote, not voting is a vote for the other side. If you are, I think, we have to remind people, sort of the what have you done for me lately kind of model. And also, like Brionté said, but also, what's in it for me. So when you have conversations with people, you've listened to all the things that they've said. In this instance, they're probably going to say a lot of things that they're upset about, that they're mad about, that they're angry about. Listen, hear, affirm, and then say, well, if you don't vote, are any of those things going to get fixed? If you don't vote, is anything going to get better? And at the end of the day, the answer for that question is always going to be no. And so I also like to affirm and say to people, oftentimes, so start with, there's no perfect candidate. No one is going to check every box for every issue that's important to you. No one is always going to say or do the right thing. But at the end of the day, if you line up all the issues and you think about what's important, and if you don't vote, none of these things, you don't have a chance to fix any of these things. We don't have a chance to get any wins. So oftentimes, it'll come down to, people will say it comes down to the lesser of two evils. Well, if you don't vote, evil is going to win. So you've got to vote. You cannot sit this one out. We cannot afford to sit this one out. And that's really what it, kind of boils down to. It's kind of tough to make those arguments in a nonpartisan space. But, if we can lean into those local issues, I'm excited that some of the states where we're doing work, the legalization of cannabis is on the ballot. That is going to motivate a lot of young people to come out and vote in that moment. We know that reproductive freedom is on the ballot. That is going to be a motivating factor for a lot of folks. The climate crisis is just that, in such crisis mode that it may alienate some folks, but I think reminding them that it's not going to get better by not voting. It is going to, be a pathway to get people to vote. And then, as much as you can, pivot back to the local things, what is happening at the local level, and try to stay away from as many of those conversations about the president as possible. Because even though President Biden, from a climate standpoint, as Brionté mentioned, has done a lot of great things, that's not what makes headlines. That's not what national press and national media talk about. And again, because of the way climate justice has been introduced, it's alienating, because a lot of people just don't understand and make a connection between saving the polar ice caps and my light bill. It's just a difficult proposition for people to understand. Yeah.
Thank you, Wanda, and thank you, Brionté. Unfortunately, we are coming to the end of our hour together. As I reflect upon this hour, I think that there are so many things that have been said that I think many in our audience and myself can take and leverage in our local church community, because those are places where we have personal relationships and we have one-on-one conversations with people, and we should be talking about some of the important issues that are being faced locally in our community. That's the place where we need to be talking about it. And so we have some real opportunities for us, I think, in the year ahead. And you've really helped us think about how to make the most of those opportunities and where we might get plugged in to devote some time and some effort. So thank you so much for all that you've contributed. Michael, do you have some closing thoughts for us as we wrap this up? And as always, we'll be transitioning. For those who wish to stick around, Thaddaeus Elliott is with us to give us the latest update on what's going on in Washington, D.C. But Michael, what are your thoughts here?
I actually want to piggyback off of what I saw Brother Dwight said in the chat. Don't be afraid to say you do your work as an act of faith. In essence, we are ambassadors for our faith. So not only do we have a congregation that we may be in leadership over, but we've got a whole denomination, and some of us have whole communities that we represent as well through our faith. And so don't be afraid to put your faith forward and say that this vote is a vote on my faith. Again, when we want to save the bus, it should be our faith that compels us to that. Thank you all.